Well, welcome back to Daily Bible with Chris. So glad that you are joining me today, whenever, wherever. For me, it's a beautiful Saturday morning as temperatures are starting to cool off just a little bit, and we're starting to get those early glimpses of fall weather in the air. Still got a little ways to go, but so glad that you're joining wherever, whenever you may be watching this, whether it's on the day of its release or years from now, somebody finds this. So glad that you are here. Would just love to encourage you, if you are new to the channel, to hit that subscribe button and maybe give this video a like. This is my follow-up video that I do to our previous daily Bible reading from yesterday, where we had our reading in we're in the book of Psalms, so Psalm 36 through 40. So I just say this at the front. If you've not already read those 5 chapters, Psalm 36 through 40, or not already watched the previous video reading we did of that, I'd encourage you to do that first, then come back here. And all we do is just kind of go through the chapters and pull out some themes. As such, this is not an exhaustive study by any stretch, but just kind of pull out some general themes and applications we can make to our own life. So again, if you've not already read that or listened to that, I encourage you to do that first, then come back for this. It just make a lot more sense for you. But again, we're continuing with these 5 Psalms of David. In Psalm 36, we have this idea. In Psalm 36, it's a fairly short psalm, just 12 verses, but David's kind of describing a wickedness and then kind of contrasting that with the love that God has for those that are his, the righteous, the ones that do his will, that follow him, that trust him. And so he describes this understanding of the wicked person. He said the wicked person has no fear of God. They have no dread of oncoming judgment for them. He has a flattering opinion of himself. He doesn't discover and hate iniquity. Why? Because he is in his natural state. The wicked person, the sinful person, our natural state is to sin and to do what is wrong. It's only when God's Spirit comes and inhabits us after we confess him as Lord, after we repent of our sins, he comes in, that then we truly have the ability to overcome. Certainly it's always a choice to sin, but our natural inclination is more to sin because of our sin nature handed down from Adam, to sin. But when the Holy Spirit comes in, as we grow closer to the Lord, as we become more mature in our spiritual walk, our ability to overcome sin becomes not perfect, but it becomes much easier for us to overcome and to fight those battles and to make better choices in our life. It's never easy, but it can become a little bit easier to overcome and to have victory. And so he's describing the words of them. They're arrogant. They're full of themselves. They're malicious. They're deceptive. They don't do anything good. He describes them laying in their bed, devising malicious plans. He sets a path that is not good. He does not reject evil. So the wicked person stands up for the things that are wrong. He plans things that are wrong. He's in bed with the things that are wrong. And then we pivot, verse 5. Lord, your faithful love, your mercy comes down from heaven. Your faithfulness to the clouds, your righteousness is like the highest mountains. This beautiful description. David is very poetic in his descriptions. You preserve your people and animals. This idea, you preserve all of creation, every bit of life that you've given, you preserve it. How priceless is your faithful love. It's one to know that you are truly loved by God, the God who created everything, that he deeply desires to be in a relationship with you. He loves you so much. When you truly grasp that understanding, it is so deep and so perfect a love that we can never fully understand. And he's going to describe how we take refuge in the shadow of your wings. Again, this kind of descriptive, obviously God is not a bird with big wings, but he's describing as a chick hides under the wings of his mother hen. We take refuge in the very just shadow of his wings. And you let them drink from your refreshing spring, for the wellspring of life is with you. By means of your light we see. So we get this idea that there is refreshing. There's the water of life. And we have to have, as human beings, we have to have water to survive. You can go a long time without food, but you can't go very many days without water, because you will die. The majority of our body is made up of water. So we need water for life. And so we see this description here of the wellspring, the refreshment we get from him in the presence. In essence, we take a drink from the Lord himself. And Jesus himself described himself as the water of life. And he told the woman at the well that from him, he's the water of life. And from him, you take a drink of who Jesus is, you'll never thirst again. How many of us would love to never have to be thirsty again, right? But spiritually, we're never thirsty again. And then he describes the light we see because of the light of God. Jesus himself said, I am the light of the world. And so we see this description of light and water, things that we need for life, not only just physical life, but spiritual life as well. Spread your faithful love over those who know you. In other words, almost like a net, just spreading it over them. Don't let the arrogant come near. Keep the wicked one away. Keep those ones we were describing in the first verses away. Let them fall down. Let them be thrown down where they cannot rise. Because, of course, David had his fair share of enemies. And then in chapter 37, we have a bit of a psalm here describing wisdom. And this is a much lengthier psalm. We're just going to pull some general things. There's 40 verses in this as well. But again, he's going to describe the evildoers. He's telling the righteous person, don't let the evil person get you all agitated and frustrated. Don't envy those who do wrong. Why? Because they're going to wither quickly, just like a plant or a tender green plant it's just going to like the grass. We just came through summer and grass has grown and we've had to cut it, but there's coming a time when that grass is going to disappear and it's going to be gone, right? Those blades are going to dry up and die. And he's describing here the fact that the ones who do wicked, yes, they may seem to have everything going right for them right now, but there's coming a time when they will be no more. And so we should not let them. And it's so easy when we look around us, we look on the internet, on the TV, whatever, see so much stuff that's going wrong. There's nothing wrong with having some righteous indignation about it, but we shouldn't sweat it either, because at the same time, we know that God is ultimately going to set things right. And those who do wicked things, if they don't turn to Christ for salvation, they don't turn to him for forgiveness of their sins, one day they will be judged for their wickedness. And so we trust. And then he says, don't worry about them. And then verse 3, trust in the Lord, and you trust in the Lord and you do what is good. You do what you know to be right, what the Lord teaches us in his word to do. Trust him and then do what is right and dwell in the land, live securely. I think this is also, he's describing the children of Israel as well. If they trusted God, if they were obedient to God, they didn't have to worry about the enemies around them because they would be protected. God had made a covenant promise to them. Take delight in the Lord and he will give you your heart's desires. It doesn't mean necessarily he's going to give you every little whim and wish. God's not a big genie sitting up in heaven waiting for you to rub the lamp and say, I want. But there are times when we do have things that we desire, we want, we do take those things to the Lord. And if it's something that's in keeping with God's will for our lives, he was happy to give. But so there is a principle there that you have not because you ask not. So if there's the things that you have a desire, a godly desire, don't be afraid to ask God. Doesn't mean that he has to do it, but he just might do that. He might give it, just as he describes himself as a good father who gives his children good things. God is a good father. And so we should commit our way to the Lord. And then there's times, verse 7, where we need to be silent before the Lord and wait expectantly for him. There's a time for crying out and pleading, and then there's a time for waiting. And that comes with just understanding and maturity. Wait with expectation for him to answer. And don't be agitated by one who prospers when maybe you're not prospering, or by the person who carries out evil to benefit themselves. Don't be agitated by that. Pity them in some ways, because for some of those folks, that may be this earth may be the only heaven they ever experience. And certainly there's a greater heaven coming. Refrain from anger and give up your rage. Don't be agitated. Again, he's just kind of reminding, if you want to be wise, these are some things. The wicked person schemes, but the Lord laughs at him because he sees that his day is coming. In other words, those who are doing evil, they laugh, they make fun, they say there's no God. You're just, you're believing fairy tales and you're believing, horse manure to believe that there's a God or whatever. And God just sits in heaven and says, what a foolish person. But if you want to be wise, believe in God, trust in God, follow God. The wicked draw their weapons against God, but God will destroy them, will take them down. The little that the righteous person has is better than the abundance of many wicked people. Again, we see people that are wicked seem to be prospering. They're the ones that are the millionaires and the billionaires, and they seem to do everything that's corrupt and immoral, and yet they seem to bless. Don't worry about it, because the little that you have that God has given you is greater than anything they've come by through those kind of ways and evil ways. It may not feel that way, but that's why we shouldn't envy. We shouldn't covet things like that. Be happy, be grateful for the things that the Lord has given to us, because the Lord destroys the wicked. The Lord watches over the righteous and all their days, and their inheritance will last forever. If you are a follower of Christ, if you are a believer, you have a promised eternal home with God in heaven. And you have these things such as the crown of salvation and other things that one day, if you follow God and you do the will of God, one day there are things that are incorruptible, as Paul says, the incorruptible crown. In other words, it's never going to rot away. the houses and the wealth and the cars and the planes and the things that people have now, one day, if the Lord tarries, one day they're going to be sitting in in a rubbish pile somewhere, or be nothing left of it. It's going to go the way of every other thing on the earth that eventually corrupts and rots. But the things that you lay up in heaven, that's why Jesus said to lay up treasure in heaven where moth and rust do not corrupt. In other words, those things that you make a spiritual heavenly investment. Don't worry so much. Doesn't mean you can't have nice things and good things here. Certainly God can bless to do that. But our focus should be on what are we storing up in heaven that will last us for all eternity. And so don't worry about those things. They're going to fade away. The wicked person, again, he's just describing the wicked person doing these corrupt things. They borrow and they don't repay it. We should always repay our debts, okay? And those who, a person's steps are established by the Lord, and he takes pleasure in his way. Though he falls, even the person that's a child of God will fall sometimes. He will not be overwhelmed. He will not ultimately be destroyed because the Lord supports him with his hand. This idea, almost like a father who's there with their child. They take a little tumble, and the father's there to lift them up, get them back up, walking in the right path again. Verse 25 is something to claim, especially if you're going through a tough financial time. I have been young and now I am old. So David's described, I was a young man. He's writing this as an older man. Yet I have not seen the righteous abandoned or his children begging for bread. He is always generous, always lending, and his children are a blessing. We see that the righteous person God is taking care of. He's at least taking care of their needs. And even out of those needs, that person who may not have much is generous and is always helping others. Some of the most generous people I know are some of the people who have the least, but they're willing to share what little they have with other people. Now, it doesn't mean I haven't come across some stingy, poor people as well, and vice versa. I've seen some very generous, wealthy people, and I've seen some very stingy, wealthy people. So you can find both of those cases or extremes all along that. But a child of God should be willing to give and to help and to support and be a blessing to others. Turn away from evil, do what is good. For the Lord loves justice. He will not abandon his faithful ones. He will not abandon his children. They are kept forever safe. But the wicked and their children are destroyed. The righteous will inherit the land and dwell in it permanently. Let's see. The mouth of the righteous utters wisdom. His tongue speaks what is just. How do we speak wisdom? We get wisdom from God. It's from heaven. It's that heavenly language, that heavenly understanding. The instruction of his God is in his heart. His steps do not falter. In other words, you want to be wise? Know the will of God, know the ways of God, know the steps of God, and apply them. The wicked lies in wait to destroy the righteous, but the Lord will not leave him, will not let him be overcome. Wait for the Lord and keep his way, and he will exalt you to inherit the land. You will watch when the wicked are destroyed. Again, I think we can read both understandings here. I think he's writing this psalm specifically to the people of the children of Israel, but we spiritually can take the same principles out of it. And again, we've seen the wicked. He's just that they seem to be a flourishing thing, but then they passed by and they were gone. Just that quick. They seem to be flourishing, and then boom, it's all over for them. I searched for them, they couldn't be found. I said, I watched the blameless and observed the upright. For the person of peace will have a future. We know that they have a future confirmed in heaven, but transgressors will be eliminated. The future of the wicked will be destroyed. And it ends the chapter. The salvation of the righteous is from the Lord. Salvation comes from the Lord. We cannot save ourselves. It is impossible. We can never be good enough to meet God's standard for salvation. But there was one who was good enough, and that was Jesus Christ. And because of what he did, he extends the offer of salvation to every man, woman, boy, girl. Everyone has the opportunity. It's up to us to accept the free gift of salvation that he has invited to all of us. The Lord will help us and delivers us. He will deliver us from the wicked, will save them because they take refuge in him. And then chapter 38, I believe another description here in this psalm of David describing his time when he was living in unrepentant sin, more than likely describing his unrepentant sin with Bathsheba and Uriah that we've described about before. So this goes we read a little bit of that in Psalm 32 and how happy it is. He was contrasting that with, this is how it was when I had not repented of my sins. When I repented and found forgiveness, this is how I was afterwards. This is more describing that unrepentant and what it feels like. He's like, Lord, don't punish me in your anger. Your arrows have sunk into me. In other words, the arrow of God's conviction striking him. I pressed down. There's no soundness in my body because you're upset with me because of my wickedness. There's no health in my bones because of my sin. Now, some people will say, oh, people get sick because of sin. No, that's not necessarily the case. Can that happen? Yeah. Can God use sickness as a way to get our attention? Certainly that is true, but it's not, we can't look at that and say, if somebody's got a cancer or they're sick, there's obviously sin in their life. You should examine those things, but it doesn't necessarily mean that sickness and health and lack of health is just a part of living in this fallen world. But he describes my iniquities have flooded over my head. In other words, he feels like he's drowning in his feeling of sin. The burden's too heavy for me to bear. And certainly we can't bear the burden of sin ourselves. That's why we give it over to the Lord. He can bear it. He can take it on. My wounds are foul and festering, like infected. I'm bent over and brought very low, like he's weighed down by the sin. I go around in mourning. The insides of me are full of pain. There's no soundness in my body. I'm faint. I'm crushed. I groan because of the anguish of my heart. Lord, my ever desire is in front of you. My sighing is not hidden from you. In other words, Lord, you see all this. You see I'm just crushed by my sin. Now, there's times when we're just crushed by life experiences, and the Lord tells us that he is close. We read that yesterday. The Lord is close to the tenderhearted or the brokenhearted and the crushed in spirit. And God is close to the crushed in spirit by their sin too. He's close and ready to forgive. We just need to call upon him. My heart races, my strength leaves me. The light in my eyes is fading. In other words, I can't even see which way to go. My friends, my loved ones stand back from me because they don't even really know what's going on. The ones who want to destroy me have set traps for me. They want to kill me. Then he describes the fact that he's like a deaf and a dumb or a person without speech person. I can't speak before the Lord. I can't hear from the Lord. But in regardless of that, I still put my hope in you, Lord. You will answer me, my Lord. Even though I can't hear it, I can't speak it, I feel deaf and dumb. You're the one that can open the ear, open the mouth, and don't let those who have set traps for me rejoice over me. For I'm about to fall. My pain is constantly within me. So what does he do? He knows the only remedy. I confess my iniquity. I am anxious because of my sin. And Lord, do not. So in other words, he confesses his sin. And then he says, Lord, do not abandon me, my God. Do not be far from me. Hurry to help me, my Lord, my salvation. So not only is it salvation and forgiveness of his sin, but also the enemies that in his weakened state are coming up against him. And so if you feel that way, you feel that burden of sin is upon you, then you need to turn over, the great story, Pilgrim's Progress that John Bunyan wrote. He talked about the character Christian who's weighed down with his burden, right? The burden of sin that he has. And then eventually he is relieved of his burden because of his turning to Christ. But we can feel that way, certainly. Then chapter 39, he's going to describe a little bit here. And this is specifically for a musical director by the name of Jeduthun. And he's describing here kind of the nature of life. This is going to sound somewhat like some of the passages that Solomon will write later on. But he talks about, I will guard my ways. I will guard my mouth as long as the wicked are in my presence. I was speechless and quiet. I kept silent. My heart grew hot within me as I mused. A fire burned. I spoke with my tongue. Lord, make me aware of my end and the number of my days. And so he was silent before his wicked, but then he's going to talk to the Lord. Let me know how short this life is. He's going to describe the fact that his days on this earth are so short. They're like inches on a ruler. They're like, you see a measuring tape and it's this big long, but his life is just literally just inches on it. How much is my lifespan is nothing to the Lord. The scripture tells us that a year is like 1,000, a day is like 1,000 years and 1,000 years like one day to the Lord, right? Because he is eternal and we are finite. Our soul will be eternal, but our understanding is more finite than that. He describes that the human being stands as only a vapor. In other words, we're here as a vapor and then we are gone. This time on earth is very brief when compared with all eternity. We're like a mere shadow. We rush around in vain. This sounds a lot like Solomon. We rush around trying to get wealth and possessions, and we don't even know who one day when we pass off the scene, someone else is going to get them. We don't even know who will get them. So many of these fights over the children when a parent passes away and they fight over the inheritance and the will and who gets what and whatever. And what happens if you don't have a child or whatever, somebody else, a stranger, is going to inherit your stuff. So why did you go through all the striving after stuff that you weren't even going to be able to take with you? Now, Lord, what do I wait for? My hope is in you. Rescue me from all my transgressions. I'm speechless. I do not open my mouth. Again, this idea of just being silent before the Lord. There's a time for that. Remove your torment from me. You discipline a person with punishment for iniquity, consuming like a moth. Again, God chastises. He disciplines his own children to draw us back when we are in sin. And it's not a great place to be in. Yes, every human is only a vapor. We're only here for a short period of time. And he's pleading with the Lord, hear my prayer, Lord. Listen to my cry for help. Do not be silent at my tears. For I am here with you as an alien, a temporary resident. Turn your angry gaze from me so that I may be cheered up before I die and am gone. And then chapter 40, a very famous psalm, starts off, I waited patiently for the Lord. Do you see this idea of waiting on the Lord? That's a spiritual discipline that's been lost, I think, in our modern culture where we live in the microwave culture, like the instant message culture, right? Like, boom, I want it now. I want it immediately. I don't have to wait for anything. I order a food on an app and it's to me in like 15 minutes. I don't have to wait. I don't have to do anything. There is this process of waiting on the Lord, growing, stretching our spiritual muscles by waiting. I waited, and He turned to me and heard my cry. He lifted me up from a desolate pit. This idea of just being thrown down in a pit, almost like Joseph by his brothers, thrown down in a pit, and left to rot, or like a dungeon. He took me out of the muddy, nasty clay. So He put me under this, took me out of that. And what did He? He put me up on a rock where my steps were secure. He took me from this nasty, disgusting place where I had no surety of my footing. Now I'm on a rock. He put a new song in my mouth. Notice how often David, when he sees the Lord acting, David then is inspired to write a new song. And even here we see God inspiring a new song. The inspiration, God, put the new song in my heart, a hymn of praise to our God. Many will see and fear, and they will trust in the Lord. How happy is anyone who has put his trust in the Lord and has not turned to the proud or to those who run after lies. Lord, my God, you have done many things. And he begins to describe all the things that God has done. No one can compare to you. I report and tell of these things, and you do not. And then he says, you do not delight in sacrifice and offering. You open my ears to listen. You do not ask for a whole burnt offering or sin offering. Although there are times that God in this time frame asked that and described and desired that. And there was a time for that. But he's saying in this situation, he wasn't necessarily asking for that. He says, I have come in. Then I said, see, I have come in the scroll. It is written about me. I delight to do your will, my God. In other words, and just it's like the idea here is David is saying, I delight to do what God has called me to do. And that's what God desires more than everything else. It kind of compares to where there's that famous instance where Saul had he had defeated the, King Ahag and the Amalekites, and he had been commanded by God to destroy them all. The king all the way down, kill them all, killed all the livestock, don't keep anything. And Samuel's not there. And Saul decides he's going to keep the king alive, and he's going to keep the best of the livestock, right? Probably going to, put it into his own flock and make a little money off this whole thing. And Samuel, the prophet, comes up and he asks Saul, what has happened? Oh, Saul, Saul says, Samuel, we've been victorious. We've defeated. We've done everything the Lord has asked us to do. And Samuel puts his hand to his ear almost and says, well, then what is this bleating that I hear in my ears? In other words, he could hear the sheep and the livestock making their noises. And Samuel says, what is all that? And Saul says, oh, well, I kept the best of the animals and such, and I intend to offer them as a sacrifice. I don't think Saul ever had any intention to do that, but he's kind of pivoting here. But even if he did, that's not what God asked him to do. God didn't ask him to keep a portion and sacrifice. God told him, kill them all, destroy them all, execute my justice upon this wicked people. And so Saul was disobedient, and Samuel turns to Saul and says, to obey is better than sacrifice. So oftentimes people want to go through the rituals of feeling like what they're doing, wanting to try to please God or to be good enough to whatever. And God is just saying, no, that's not what I want. I want your obedience. I want your commitment. I want your trust. I want you to walk in my ways that I've given you. Do it my way, not your way. And even when there was a time for sacrifice, but in this case, God was desiring that he would be obedient more than offer any sacrifice. And so then he's going to describe how he's lifting up God in the presence of others. Now he kept his mouth shut. Now because God has acted on his behalf and he's put this new song, he can't keep it to himself. I can't keep my mouth closed. I do not hide your righteousness. I spoke about your faithfulness and your salvation. I didn't conceal about your love. In other words, he's just telling everybody. God has been so good to him. He's telling everybody this. And of course, he's writing this psalm that we're reading thousands of years later, still describing this. And then, Lord, don't withhold your compassion, your constant love. They guard me. For troubles without number have surrounded me. There are times but Lord, be pleased to rescue me. Hurry to help me, Lord. Again, he's desperate when he needs to do that. Let those who intend to take my life be disgraced. These were constant fears that David had throughout his life. And he's asking the Lord, let them be humiliated. You've done it before. Do it again. This is what I'm desiring. I know you're acting. I'm singing about it. I'm telling people about it. And then he ends the psalm. Having trouble talking today. Ends the psalm. Let all who seek you rejoice and be glad in you. Let those who love your salvation continually say, The Lord is great. I am oppressed and needy. May the Lord think of me. You are my helper, my deliverer, my God. Do not delay. I guess in some ways, David also was a little bit, Lord, whatever you're going to do it quickly, And but that's okay. I don't think David is sinning and saying that, but God's going to work in His timetable. But our cry, our call, may spur God on to move in an even quicker manner, possibly. But notice through all of this, it's David pleading his case to God, God intervening, God acting. When David is the one in the fault, God acts once David has confessed his sin. When enemies come against him, God is protecting him. God is working in His way. David is ultimately trusting Him. And when God does act, when God does answer his prayers, David writes songs about it. He writes psalms about it. He goes into the tabernacle worship and tells everybody what God's doing. He's not keeping it to himself. He wants everyone to know that the Lord is great and the Lord is one who answers prayers. And we should do the same thing. When God works, we should share that and bless His holy name for the good things that He has done. So hopefully that's encouraging to you. We're going to be, when we have our daily Bible reading next, we'll be in chapter 41, which kind of ends what is considered the first book of Psalms. They're kind of broken up into volumes, even though they're in one book, they're in volumes. And then in chapter 42, we'll be into the next 30 Psalms, which is kind of considered book 2 of the greater collection of Psalms. So I hope that was a blessing to you. Be tuned, checking back later for our daily Bible reading for today. We'll be in Psalm chapter 41. See you then.